Officer gets a taste of his own medicine and then some.
Honestly, not sure if I'm posting this in the correct thread or not. I'm rather new to Reddit.
This happened some time ago now, but after sharing the story with a friend, he told me of this site and begged me to post it. I won't be getting to specific in case there is some unforeseen blowback, but here it is.
Bit of backstory. My wife inherited a house and land and begged me to move there.
It was somewhere I knew wouldn't have anything in either of my fields for employment,
Physical security specialist in force-on-force analytics and planning.
but she got a job offer in her field, wildlife management, at a salary that matched what we were currently making combined, along with an employment contract, rare in the U.S., control of her own team, and insanely good benefits.
Since we have no children, and I am the adaptable type, and I could see this meant a lot to her, I agreed.
We put our house up for sale, and we moved there sight unseen. While I am used to and even fond of it now, this place was the land that time forgot.
Literally horse and buggy country. And it quickly became clear that for a while, she would have to be sole income while I brought our new property into the modern era. The house literally had no plumbing. There was an outhouse and a manual well pump outside. We decided to buy a used-cast trailer, place it on the southernmost part of the property, and live in it while I worked on the house. I am not from this area, and the culture shock was intense. My wife had family from there and would spend a few summers as a child with relatives, so she understood the people better than me. And being the same height and skin tone, she was quickly accepted.
Meanwhile, standing 8 inches minimum above everyone else and being so white I show up from outer space, I had a bit of a harder time, but managed to make some friends eventually.
After some time getting everything updated, we came in way under budget since I had decided to learn the skills and do all the work myself. It quickly became clear that while our immediate area was lovely, with good people and trusting neighbors,
the surrounding counties had developed a meth pill problem, and with all the industries being strict on drug testing, once heroin came onto the scene, people were starting to make their way to our area for break-ins, carjackings, and even a few cases of kidnapping for ransom. A couple senior citizens just outside of town were broken into and beaten, then shot to death.
This for maybe $300 worth of jewelry, a couple old guns, and their pain meds. Being a need in my community, I used the leftover money we had, and I bought land in DFE deemed unfit for development at a steal. Soil aid levels were too high for housing, farming, and too remote for commercial. And after getting permit certifications and almost a year of doing all the building and earthworks myself,
while working a part-time hospital security job a county over,
I started a security, self-home defense, and firearms training company. I created local jobs in the nearby counties by training armed guards beyond state standards and helped people develop the Neighborhood Watch program. Offered neighborhood security patrols at cost. Made sure local shops got cameras and had plans and training in place in case of a robbery, and worked with individual households to develop their own home defense strategies, along with offering concealed carry training, advanced firearm training, OC spray, trauma and first aid training, and other things.
Somehow, without meaning to, I managed to wedge myself into a unique position where I not only train everyday people, but I got certified to be the guy that all police agencies in the region send their officers to for state recertification and further training.
Turns out before I came along, they had to send their officers almost 6 hours north to a state facility,
which meant that they also had to pay for a hotel room for anyone that went up there,
as well as to meals and mileage if they didn't drive a squad car.
Not to mention that the tactics taught didn't always translate well to our area.
I offered to do it for a bit less.
And given my location, no hotels or anything else were needed. For the first time in my life, I feel like my work really matters.
That I am making a positive difference for real people, and I look forward to going into my job. In my line of work, I have ended up knowing a lot of the police in my area pretty well, and can say that I even consider a few of them to be friends. The departments I work with get quite a few officers who are new or transfers from other areas, as this region of my state has a pretty median average pay grade, and a lot of officers use it as a stepping stone to get to the bigger paying areas,
or to get their first bit of experience and head to another state. Now the ones who have made a life here and decided to stay learned a long time ago that the locals here don't take shit that isn't fair lightly. The people here demand justice come hell or high water. In the past, corrupt officers have been hanged or beaten to death
when the courts failed the citizens and didn't punish officers for doing something heinous. One shot an unarmed 12-year-old and another let a drunk man die moaning in his cell after a K-9 unit literally ripped open his abdomen and was heard laughing and joking about it. Both essentially got a long paid vacation and then went right back to work until someone caught up with them. Even one former judge who got a slap on the wrist after being convicted of molesting 3 children went missing and was later found bound to a tree and was apparently set on fire while still alive. So the officers tend to do a really good job of weeding out the bad apples and reminding newcomers that they are there to help people and protect people, not harm or bully them, which in my experience is not the case with all
or even most offices and places I have lived before.
Now, on to the story. I was doing an armed guard gig during a night shift, filling in for one of my employees who had a family emergency mid-shift,
when a police car spotted me on perimeter check and pulled into the lot to see who I was. I wasn't wearing a uniform, and the place I was guarding receives a lot of raw metals that they then melt into various alloys to be shipped off for use. It's a crackhead's dream looting spot with the way scrap prices can be for some of the materials there.
After figuring out it was me, they decided to sit and BS for a bit.
While talking with these officers, I listened to them share about a new hire who transferred from a larger city,
and they just know is going to cause trouble with the locals. They mentioned how he has that "I know better than you" attitude and thinks that the piece of metal on his chest means that he is the law. Apparently, he had already raised a bit of a stink because he writes citations for things that no other officer in the department has: driving with one hand, burned out fog light, plastic being taped over a broken back window in a car, headlights not on in the middle or the day and it's raining. He even tried to give a guy an DUI even though he was sitting in the car on blocks in his driveway and it had no rear axle.
Apparently, he speaks aggressively to anyone who dare interact with him if they aren't a police officer, and overall just act like a power-tripping douche nozzle.
The other officers have noticed that the locals have changed their demeanor towards them and seem more distrusting since this guy started, and they were genuinely worried that he would turn everyone against them. In the words of one of these officers, with everything in the news these days, and the whole nation already being distrusting of us,
I hope we can find something to set the bastard straight before he ruins the rep we work so hard to keep here. I like that people here will just come up and talk to me. It's the main reason I stayed here.
We brainstormed for a while about how to get through to Officer Douche and make him change his ways or career, but eventually came up with nothing legal and had to go back to doing our respective jobs like adults.
2 weeks or so after having this chat and hearing similar things for other officers I know, I get my first interaction with Officer Douche.
I don't advertise my business on my work vehicle, and it is completely unremarkable. But all the officers I know can spot it somehow, so I've gotten in the habit of waving anytime I pass a squad car. On my way to speak with a prospective client about a consultation for their home defense plan, this asshole pulled me over for waving at him when we passed each other on a two-lane highway. He slammed his brakes on, whips around in the middle of the road, and came flying up behind me, so close I can't see his headlights with flashing lights on and siren blare. After enduring his frankly insulting lines of questioning with his hand on his pistol grip,
about why I felt the need to carry a gun.
In my state, it is required by law that anyone with a CCL has to inform the officer, and him sharing his doubts that 99% of people probably wouldn't even know how or be able to use it, the cock goblin wrote me a citation for reckless operation of a vehicle, stating that he was justified in doing so because he saw me remove my hand from the wheel.
Trying to be diplomatic, I said, I just figured that you would appreciate a friendly gesture from someone today. I know I like when someone gives me a friendly wave.
This absolute insult to humanity blows his fucking gasket. That's in my face yelling at me and threatening to haul my smart ass downtown and see how friendly I am when I am hooked up in the back of his car. He says that if he felt like it, he could cost me more in impound fees and lost wages than I would make in a month. He has no clue what I do or where I work. Then asked what I thought about that. At this point, I have an internal battle with myself, wanting to slam him to the ground and beat his skull open on the asphalt to see exactly how empty it was inside.
But saner thoughts prevail, and I simply handed him my lawyer's business card
and stated that any further interactions we had would have to go over. He looked at the card, called me a pussy, and told me to get out of his sight.
Once I got moving in my car, I realized exactly how angry he had made me.
I have spent years learning to keep my emotions to a minimum since it could cost someone dearly in my line of work. And this cunt was able to boil my blood in just a few minutes. He wasn't a big guy even for the area, and he didn't carry himself like someone who was confident if their skills. Being that aggressive and having his hand on his pistol grip for most of our interactions spoke volumes as to what kind of person this Justine was. What would happen if he pulled over someone who didn't have my level of control and acted like that or worse? I decided that the officers I had talked to were defiantly not exaggerating, and this dick was going to end up getting himself or someone else killed or hurt, and something needed to be done about it.
First, I went to court and showed my dashcam video, which got my citation dismissed. I took the rest of the audio and video to the sheriff of the county he works for and showed it to him. Then we had a long conversation. He agreed with my assessment of this guy, but said that he couldn't really do much but reprimand him for it,
and admitted that he would love to just toss him out on his ass. However, he knew that the union would fight to prevent that, and at best he would only be gone a few days to get some training that would most likely go entirely ignored. He even cautioned me against filing against him because he figured the guy was the type to take it personal, and he didn't want to see anything happen to me. He promised he would do what he could to get rid of the cunt, but in most ways his hands were tied.
I could tell he hoped that the guy would just move on and become someone else's problem when his 2 years were up. I couldn't help thinking that if he's causing this kind of trouble already,
it is only a matter of time before someone around here loses it on this douche and swings at him. And even though the cunt deserves to eat his own teeth at least, some poor guy will end up with his life ruined or worse. All because Officer Douche has a badge and likes to wag his dick beater. Feeling as though there was nothing more I could do, I went about my business as usual the next couple days.
Then guess who came through my door to schedule with me for their recertification?
He didn't know me from Adam, and just swaggered about like he owned the place, and bitched about this being a waste of his time and a bunch of bureaucratic bullshit.
I had a real Kodak moment when I reminded him of our last interaction.
He tried to excuse it as just being by the book and claimed that his hands were tied when it came to the citation. And he only acted that way because I had a firearm and he was nervous about that gun, so he needed to assert his authority over the situation. By now, I had had a large portion of the people that live in my area come though for training, and most of them carried daily.
The stick just confirmed my fears for me, and I was going to do what only I could to lay those fears to rest.
Cue ProRevenge mode. Already forming a plan, I told him that I understood completely, and that I operate the way as well. Not even processing how that could affect him. The dipshit seemed glad to hear that, and we sat down to get his paperwork started.
The whole time we are doing this, he is bragging and talking about how good a shot he is,
and that he looks forward to the day someone wants to fuck around and find out with him. Hearing the was he thinks made me both sick and angry.
Yes, I carry a gun for self-defense, but I hope that I never have to use it. I spent years learning other techniques to lessen that chance after having to draw it once, and built a career teaching others what I have learned. After getting all the paperwork sorted and scheduling a time and date, he asked if he could use my range to get some practice shots in.
I even waived my range fee just to see this POS shoot. After going over the range rules, I ran him out at target at 10 yards and signaled the lane hot. He fired all 17 rounds out of his mag at a rapid pace and only managed to hit 5 on the target,
only one of which was center mass.
He repeated this for more times at varying distances, and his best score ended up being at 5 yards out with only 10 shots on target, of which 4 were center mass. I suggested he slow up his cadence a bit and asked if he wanted my advice. He told me he's forgot more than I ever knew and to shut my mouth. So I did. Then he proceeded to run it out to 10 yards and shoot one at a time at a slow pace I usually only see from first timers, and didn't get a single hit center mass. After seeing the 13-year-old girl a few lanes down from him load up and absolutely drill head shots at 15 yards with my range master instructing her, he made some excuse about needing his sights adjusted.
Then packed up, and the brainless cunt nugget left thinking we were all buddy-buddy a few minutes later. I use targets similar to these if you need a visual reference for the next part. The state certifications are a bit simple. So when I started doing this, I met with local union lawyers, training officers, and some reps for our area.
And we came up with a standard that surpasses the minimum state requirements,
which they in turn used to negotiate better benefits. So everyone wins.
The standards we decided on not only test for accuracy, but also introduces a bit of real-world problems that the officers have to contend with. The first is done in full duty gear with both hands on the gun at 10 yards.
After running 25 yards, within 2 minutes,
you have to be able to draw your gun from crouch cover, fire 10 rounds, reload a magazine loaded by me with a false round randomly placed in it to cause a malfunction, clear that malfunction, and get 10 more rounds on target from standing cover. The second is the same drill in reverse, but done with only one hand on the gun and in under 3 minutes. In both of these drills, 15 of the 20 shots must be within the number 8 ring of the target, and all rounds must hit the target. And the third is a dot torture drill that must be cleared at 90% within 10 minutes, and you have 3 attempts at it.
It doesn't sound too tough if you are an avid shooter, but trust me, under pressure, with your job in the balance, it can be rough.
That torture drill explained here. See, the policy around here is that the county pays for your first test, and if an officer fails, to recertify.
Then they either choose 2 weeks unpaid leave or sit at the office and do paperwork at reduced pay for 2 weeks. Then they have to pay out of pocket to try again.
Of course, it is encouraged that they come to me for help.
But being that I am not a charity, some choose to practice on their own, which is fine. If they fail a second time, the sheriff can cut them loose without any issues from the union.
And the officer has to wait 1 year to even be considered for rehire or relocate to a different area that doesn't have these standards.
Or the sheriff orders them to come to my training, and I work with them until we know they will pass.
After that second failure, the officer's job lies entirely in the hands of their boss. Being that these tests are a bit tasking for most shooters, and even though a log way more range time than any officer I know helps when you own the range and can still occasionally fail the dot torture drill.
I will show mercy for most of them if they seem like a decent person who is just out of practice.
Or nervous and not be an ass when it comes to scoring if they are close to a failing score. Pounding line breaks as hits when I don't have to. Forgetting to hit the stopwatch button if their cadence is just a second or too slow. I decided the moment he signed the papers that there would be no such mercy for this douche nozzle. I fully expected for him to burn, though I'm all practicing at home after his last performance. And while I doubted anything was actually wrong with his sights, I wasn't willing to risk being wrong there when I had such a golden opportunity to do some true community service. I even bought a new set of digital calipers, deciding that if he was so much as 1/10 of an inch off on any shot placements at the line, I would mark them as a miss and prove I was just going by the book.
My mind was made up that since I couldn't get this guy off the force completely,
I would go by the book and at least get him off of any that were close to the people around me, and he would have to preform like an absolute pro to avoid it. The day finally comes where he is to test, and he shows up wearing shorts and a tap-out t-shirt with only his gun and duty belt emptied of everything else.
No vest, no range bag, no radio, no eyewear protection, no cuffs, OC spray or taser.
Not a damn thing that he knew he was supposed to have. After pointing these issues out, he huffs and says, "I brought everything that is important. Let's just get this shit over with."
I knew I could have failed him right then and there for non-compliance.
I had a copy of his signature on the paperwork stating he owned all required gear and would bring it with him for the test, and that he would be dressed to listed standards on testing day.
But that just wouldn't have been satisfying enough for me. I wanted to make absolutely sure that anyone who looked into it would see that he himself was the failure.
That this loudmouth, bolstering piss stain wasn't fit to the standards of his peers, and his mother should have swallowed him 25 years ago and done society a favor. Not that he failed due to circumstantial or bureaucratic bullshit beyond his control. I let the clothing slide and loaned him some rental safety gear, which he bitched about wearing but eventually put on. After getting it all sorted and noting all this in his chart, I let him take his test, and damn it am I glad that I did. If he hadn't made me see him for the faded piece of shit he is, I would have felt sad for him. As it stands, I worried I may develop muscle issues from holding back my grin. He failed the first test immediately due to sheer ineptitude. When the buzzer sounded, first he tripped over his own feet and ate the ground face first, full scorpion, and after getting up and continuing while drawing from crotch, he somehow managed to catch his front sight or barrel on his holster opening and sent his gun tumbling through the dirt, then fell over when he tried to lean over to get it. Losing control of the firearm is an instant test stop, so I sounded the buzzer, holding back laughter, and putting on my plate carrier instead of just a level 3 vest in case the fool fired a random round my way. I gave him a second chance even though I already had what I needed, mostly because I wanted to have a refutable proof he failed on his skills and not on accidental circumstances. While he managed to keep hold of it this time, he struggled to clear the misfire, costing him too much time for his slow cadence earlier, and only the shots were in the number 8 and for completely missed the target. For the first time ever for me, someone had failed the first test on all 3 metrics. I have had people come to me for the first time they held a gun, or with a legitimate fear of guns who could out-preform this arrogant twat waffle. After listening to him try to make excuses, bitch, the man, and then beg for me to give him another chance, I told him that I couldn't and he failed, that my report was getting sent in and he would have to talk to his training officer and we could go from there. He exploded in anger and started calling me anything he could think of, claiming I was only doing this because of the ticket he gave me, part of why I wanted so much proof, and cursing me in some honestly creative ways while slamming his fist into my wall like a petulant tween, and telling me that he was going to make sure you all regret this, while pointing at me and my staff in the other room. By now, a couple of my regulars, my range master and the local brass goblin, have all made it over to watch though the window and listen to the exchange. Knowing I have him on camera with audio punching a hole in my wall, and I have witnesses. A new thought came to me when I heard him say this, and I decided to steer him just the way I wanted him to go.
All I had to do was ask if what he said was a threat, and the dipshit responded with, "You bet your fucking ass it is," and to my surprise, reached out to give me a shove.
I sidestepped him, and he stumbled past, which pissed him off even further.
I told him then and there to get the fuck off my property, and that he wasn't welcome back. I looked this sack of shit straight in the eye and informed him that he
just sealed his fate, since now he would have to beg to be sent to the other facility.
And I would make certain my report recommended he never work as an officer again.
And should they ignore my advice, I would be raising my prices to better reflect the training they get here. He then decided to spit at me and swing a punch this time.
Not one to miss an opportunity, and easily outweighing him by 50 to 60 pounds. I raised my guard, and the moment his arm made contact with my mine,
I used his momentum and my muscle to send him over my shoulder and directly into the ground with all I could muster.
I channeled my ancestors and the ancient gods of their homeland into that throw,
fully intending to leave a coyote-esque crater in my floor. Rolling him to his back and sitting atop him in full mount position, I watched a wannabe badass try to remember how to breathe after meeting the ground that hard, and immediately cry like a bitch, beg for his life when he looked past me to see my range master, 310-pound 6'6", tatted up retired Marine turned body balance.
With our less lethal training shotgun, the gun is bright green, and unmistakable as less lethal.
In one hand leveled to Officer Bitchmade's head and his phone, in the other already talking to the cunts boss.
Apparently, my range master had been watching everything from his office on the security feed.
And when Officer Douche started punching the walls, my boy immediately picked up the phone and called the sheriff, grabbing the shotgun on his way out the door to us.
When all was said and done, I got to watch him get hauled off my property by his boss, in cuffs and read his rights since. Yes, I will be pressing charges. He assaulted me, threatened me and my employees, and damaged my property.
And I had all the evidence I need to prove it.
Later, when I asked my range master why he had brought the gun into play,
since the guy wasn't really a threat, he reluctantly told me he had brought it for me. Apparently, in all the time we had known each other, he had never seen me actually come unglued like that. He said, "Boss, you are the kindest and quietest man I know."
And in my experience, when a man like you gets that angry, even the devil himself would piss his pants to get away.
He admitted that his plan was to nail me with a beanbag, or to, if he needed, and try to turn my attention to him.
Not going to lie, I wasn't happy to know I had made my friend feel that way.
But it did feel good in an odd way to have a certified badass feel like he needed that tool to stand against me.
I gave the man a raise for his honesty and willingness to protect others, no matter the cost to himself. After all, that's a rare quality anymore, and it should be rewarded.
And to this day, I refuse to spar with him because I never want him 100% know he could take me without it.
Despite all the evidence and testimony against him, Officer Douche ended up getting a pretty good plea deal.
But he will never be able to be a police officer or legally own a firearm again. So I consider it a win. His wife filed for divorce for domestic violence while he was awaiting his court date. And thankfully they had no children together, so it was granted without issue. And he has no rights to see her son. He moved away immediately after his hearing. And last I had heard, he makes minimum wage working at a gas station somewhere up north. TLDR, our tripping policeman messes with the wrong person in the wrong place. Edit. Thank you guys so much for all the awards, compliments, and constructive criticism.
I will do my best to respond to your comments as quickly as I can.
And please feel free to PM anything you don't want in the public thread.
HOA member doesn't know the rules as well as he thinks. Obligatory on mobile, and while English is my first language, I suck at it. This story primarily takes place between me and shitty neighbor who is a member of my community's HOA. Sorry if it's a bit long. As a bit of background, me and my 3 roommates moved into a housing community that is basically just a bunch of cookie-cutter townhomes. All of these homes have garages that open onto streets that wind through the community. This is important later, with your front door opening to a path on the other side of your house. There are also some free parking spots on the edge of the community where there are no houses. When we first moved in, we quickly found out that parking could be a bit of a pain during the day, especially when people had guests during the weekend. My roommates and I admittedly have more cars than the average family, because we usually have to commute for work. We each have one. We try to make parking easier by using the garage, but we all have tons of sporting equipment, so we can usually only get one car in the garage. When all the parking in all the free spots is full, we just park our cars right up against the garage and leave them there during the day or overnight. We've seen other neighbors do it, and it's still left ample room for people driving on the street to get by. Well, one day shitty neighbor come up while my roommates and I are in the garage organizing some stuff, and tells us that we can't park there overnight as it's against community rules. Before we had a chance to respond, he added, "And if you do it again, I will personally make sure you're towed." His first comment was pretty reasonable. We'd just moved in and didn't know that rule. But his second comment really just made him sound like an ass and wasn't necessary. One of my roommates simply responded that we didn't know as we just moved in and we wouldn't park there overnight anymore. Well, shitty neighbor, clearly trying to assert his dominance, responded with good. "You better not, because I'll be watching." Well, from then on we did follow those rules. If we parked in front of our garage during the day, we would make sure to move before we went to sleep. This worked out for a while until one fateful day. One of my roommates stopped by quickly after work to grab some dinner and clothes before heading to his girlfriend's. This was around 7 p.m, so he just parked up against the garage as it would be quicker than the parking spaces. Plus, it was early enough that he didn't think he'd get towed. Around 8 p.m, he went to head out and his car was gone. Guess who was there? Those shitty neighbors standing right outside. Immediately, he said to my roommates, "Told you were going to get towed if you parked here again." Asen and my roommate argued for a bit before my roommate came back inside and calls the car lot. Well, it ends up they're closed, so he'll have to get his car in the morning. The kicker, they're going to charge him an overnight fee. All in all, it comes out to $500, which isn't a small amount of money for us. This neighbor has been an ass to us since we moved in, and even though it wasn't my car that was towed, I took this personally. To make sure we didn't get towed again, we decided to read the community rules. And lo and behold, we found out that the street in front of the garage is actually considered a fire lane, and no one is supposed to park there at any point during the day. Between shitty neighbor treating us like shit, and the fact that we could get him yelling at his wife every night. Not a big detail to the story, but just wanted to say to add to my point that this guy just sucked, I start to plan my revenge. Since quarantine started, I've been able to work from home, and my desk conveniently looks out onto the street between the houses. This means that I can clearly see shitty neighbor's garage. I start to take notice of when he parks his car out in front of his garage. For about 2 weeks, I noticed that he would come home around 1 p.m. and leave again at 2 p.m. On the third week, I decided I would begin the revenge. On Monday, true to his schedule, he stopped by around 1. After about 10 minutes, I gave the tow company a call and said that he was parked in the fire lane and if they could come and remove his car. 20 minutes later, a tow truck rolled up, hooked his car up, and towed it off. About 15 minutes later, shitty neighbor came out and I could hear him start to yell back into his house, presumably at his wife. He then left and didn't come back until later that evening after he'd gotten his car. Now, it was funny to do this, and I made sure to send snaps to my roommates who don't work from home, but I wasn't done yet. See, this jackass apparently didn't learn the first time, because literally the next day he parks in front of his garage again. What do? Well, the exact same thing as the day before, of course. Again, Essen come out, realizes his car is gone, yells at his wife, and then goes to get it. Now, after this time, he is a bit smarter and parks in an actual spot before going in to get his lunch or whatever it is he does there midday. He does this for about 2 weeks before he decides that it's okay to park in front of his garage again. Well, who is still sitting at their desk every day and notices this immediately? Well, me, of course. And being the concerned resident that I am, I immediately call the tow company and off his car goes again. And again this is met with yelling. I wish that this had a more satisfying ending, but after this third time I decided I would stop, because I genuinely felt bad for his wife, who he seemed to do most of the yelling at as if it was her fault that he was a dumbass. What I can tell you is that it definitely cost him over $1,000. If he hadn't gotten my roommate's car towed, then we wouldn't have ever found that fun little rule. The best part was that a number of my neighbors would have their cars parked there at the same time, and they'd never have their cars towed, which made it all the better when his was. We have had a number of other encounters that with him in the time since this happened, and I have another story that involves the actual HOA that I'll probably write later. The one is still ongoing though, so we'll see how it ends up. TLDR, asshole neighbor gets my friend's car towed, so I get his towed 3 times. It removed initials and replaced them with shitty neighbor. Too, by popular decision, I've decided that this story actually won't conclude with me stopping. I've had lots of advice about recording him yelling at his wife and trying to help that situation. I've also been told that I should figure out if he's using HOA funds to pay off these bills. This one may be a bit harder to obtain since we are just renters, but I'll see what I can do. One thing to note is that he has no idea that it's me calling, and I'm trying to keep it that way. I will keep everyone updated with my progress and if anything new happens.
Check out my other incredible videos.